All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Well, we've got a slightly different format today than our typical approach to a webinar, which is, a slide deck and some talking and maybe some stuff on the board. Today, we're just straight live. We're going to be going directly into SharePoint and potentially Teams and demonstrating the capabilities that sit within systems that most of us already have at our workplace. Oftentimes we get organizations that reach out to us and say, hey, I need a solution for this, or I need a solution for that. And there's plenty of software companies that offer fantastic solutions. But not every organization can afford licensing or, want to be connected to a specific software for a very simple solution. And so we often recommend that they build inside SharePoint or Teams the capabilities that they need that are simple enough to utilize the products that you already have in your business, which typically is Office 365. So today we're going to go a little bit into the utilization of SharePoint. Some of its capabilities will explain some basic things inside SharePoint. We're not going to get really crazy with respect to development in SharePoint, but we will show you some of the capabilities that sit within there that you can take advantage of at your workplace and make very simple solutions that increase productivity. And today we're going to look at defect elimination, which is really the identification, prioritization, and execution of tasks. Typically, a defect elimination approach is looking at losses in a manufacturing facility. And so we want to give the operator a very simple methodology to track a defect and have that, if they can't solution it right then and there, have that go to a corporate or central team or a team at the plant, who then reviews those defects, prioritizes them, and begins to assess root cause analysis, identification of action items, and tracking those action items to make sure that they are completed. Now, before we dive into that, don't forget that there's a ability for you to ask questions directly during this webinar. Because we're going to be going through some technical things, type up your questions, submit your question, and hopefully I remember to look on a very frequent basis at what those questions are. It's great to see all the folks that have joined. We've got a pretty decent crowd already and many names that I am familiar with because, well, you guys like to attend on a weekly basis our webinars, which is fantastic. We really appreciate that. We love to be able to give back to the community, and we love to be able to share experiences we had, but we are not perfect. So during our technical session today, hopefully we don't have any technical issues with development in SharePoint, but occasionally they'll update language, they'll pass on updates in the system, and it kind of breaks a couple things and you need to fix things, but we should be okay. All right, so first things first, let's share a screen. Okay, hopefully at this point you are, let's see, do we want picture in picture? No, because then I just get in my own way. Okay, so you should be seeing a screen with a whole bunch of SharePoint sites that we use internally in my company here. But we're going to look at some very specific ones. We're going to create a new one from scratch and kind of walk through what that process looks like. And this can happen either directly in SharePoint, or you can do this from Teams. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. In the team space, it's very simplified. And so you get access to specific apps inside of Teams. You can connect certain types of things. But essentially the back end of Teams where document management, list management, and all those other activities take place is actually SharePoint. So let's start with just creating a team, and we'll go from there then. I'm going to remove the whole thing and just do it again. Remove. Okay. Inside Teams, once you've created a team, we created a basic team that just says defect elimination example. we're going to add a tab. When you go to add a tab, there's lots of different options here for applications that are built directly for teams. And you can kind of look through what is available. Some of them are directly from Microsoft, some of them are from third parties, but you can pretty much add anything you want. Some of them actually connect to external tools and have direct integrations to products you may already have, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to add a task list. The task list functionality inside Teams allows us to do a couple of things. The first thing is it allows us to create buckets for the tasks. So in the example we were giving earlier, we named one of these receiving. We named another one line 1 and another one line 2. And so I've got buckets that I can categorize things by. I can use area of the plant if that's what I choose. We're going to add a task for the receiving area. We're just going to call it task 1. Inside the individual task inside Teams, I can assign it to a person. We'll leave that alone. I can give it a status of either not started, in progress, or completed, and I can give it a priority. I can give it a start date and a due date. And I can decide if this is a recurring task. You can actually create repeating tasks inside of Teams. One of the other things you can do, which is very useful, is to add checklist items. So for example, this may be a long task. It might not be something that just takes one day to get done, and there may be multiple actions inside of it. Or maybe the task was assigned to you, let's say, to schedule training. And so I've got some actions that I have to do here, right? I've got to select a vendor to deliver the training on them. I have to get list of attendees. I have to agree to a delivery date. I've got to schedule a room, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now I have the ability as the task owner to give myself a checklist and start looking at progress. The checklist is also movable. I can move things around if I was brainstorming, but now need to put them in a sequential order. And I can see that status on the progress bar as I go through the checklist. The other thing that you can do is add what's called a label. Excuse me. And by default, Microsoft just colors these. But you have the ability to edit what the labels are. So let's say, I don't know, maybe you want, the example we gave earlier was I want a label for departments that are involved or responsible. So we're going to say procurement. We're going to change red to operations. We're going to change green to maintenance. We're going to change yellow to finance. And right now I've got procurement and operations listed as flags on this particular item. Let's say I get a task for line 1 and it's going to say stop box jams. We add the task. We can then populate all the relevant information. We can say this one's in progress if we want. We can say it's important. Give it a start date. Give it an end date. This thing's, let's make it past due just so we can see that. And again, we can do a longer description or add individualized tasks. We can also add an attachment. And let's add one more. Oh, let's put some flags on that one. Let's see, operations is involved, maintenance is involved. And we can add another task here, set a due date for it, assign it. If we want to get into further details, we have to hit add task and then open the task itself. We'll say this one's finished. And we'll just leave it at that. Now inside Teams, I get quite a few different ways to see the information. The upper right-hand side of the Teams window gives me 4 different ways to view the planner tabs. The one we are looking at now is called the board. The list view looks like this, and I can sort things any way I want. I can sort them by assigned to, I can sort by the bucket they belong to, I can sort by the title if that's what I want to do. I can also look at charts. And in the charts, I can look at, well, I've got one task late. I got one that's completed. I got one that's currently not started. I can see who's doing the tasks. As usual, I'm doing all the work. And I can look at them by priority. I can also look at everything based on a schedule. And so I can see it's not precisely a Gantt chart, but similar to a Gantt chart where I'm looking at a calendar and I can see the duration expectation of the tasks. What I do like about the way the planner tab manages this is I'm looking at them by status. So past due looks red, in progress is this gray color, and green ones are completed. I can also look at hiding. I can hide future tasks if they're recurring events. And I can filter things out if I want. I can filter out things that are, I can just look at things that are late. I can look at things that are due tomorrow. I can look at things that are due next week. Or I can remove those filters. Let's go back to our board view. And in the board view, there's a couple of other ways to see the information. Right now, we are looking at it grouped by bucket. The buckets that we created, that's the columns that we see. But that's not the only option. I can look at it by assigned to and see that I have 2 assigned tasks. And you'll notice down here that completed tasks are hidden on the board by default, but I can expand them and see that. I can look at it by progress, so I can see what's not started, what's in progress, what's completed. If you select completed or by progress, you will actually see the completed ones. If I look at it by due date, again, it hid the completed entity, but I'm looking at things that are late, things that are due immediately, and things that are due next week. I can look at it by the labels. And so here I can see I've got a task that belongs to procurement, but that same task is here. You'll see it duplicated because it's also in the operations bucket. So any flags that you select, any labels that you select for a task will show up in each of the buckets associated with that specific label. And so we see here we've got 2 in the operations side, but essentially we only have 2 tasks, right? They just both have operations listed on them. And then we've got one that sits in the maintenance side. Okay, so for Teams and managing defects, this is just a task management tool. The cumbersomeness of being just stuck to Teams is how do you get the new tasks into the solution, into the planner tab? That can happen in a variety of ways. One is they all require a device of some sort, but they would require folks to log into their Microsoft account in order to get to the either planner application or Teams application. You could centralize a tablet device at the line or in certain areas of the plant and have it default or in a kiosk mode with just showing this tab if that's what you want to do. But there are some limitations on the team side that, forced me, or at least my preference is to develop inside SharePoint. I have much more control over specific fields. In these scenarios here, there's not a lot of ways to edit what the progress looks like and priorities look like and all the pieces here. I can't really customize this entire list. there's not a way, even if I go to the list view, you'll see there's no way for me to add columns here. You're a little stuck with what you can and can't do. And so my preference is to manage this inside of Teams or inside of SharePoint. Now, earlier, before I realized we were losing everybody, we've got a couple more hands up. Let's take a look, see what that is. I'm still seeing, oh, oh, we're good. Okay. All right. So where we left off was explaining the document management piece. So inside of Teams, we've got a list of documents. And from here, I can add folders. And oftentimes, this is how folks manage information inside things like SharePoint, Teams, and the use. What's the odds of me randomly picking the same letters? Okay. Use the Windows Explorer on a shared server someplace, or they create folders inside their team space. This is not a great way to utilize the functionality. There's much better utilization inside both SharePoint and Teams to manage items and or documents that allow you to have metadata associated with the document, so you can have just one list. We'll give you a brief little example of that maybe during this session, but there is a future webinar very specific to document management in SharePoint. So keep your eyes out for that and see if you can't see if you can join that, because that's going to be a pretty valuable one. All right, so for now, we are going to go to SharePoint. Here is our defect elimination page in SharePoint. And we've got this document library that's not following best practices, so we're going to delete some folders here because that'll drive me nuts. Now, if I want to manage defects, there's a few things I need to do. I need to be able to receive new defects in, and then I need to be able to manage the effort to eliminate the defects. So let's first start with, how do we get the defects into a list? Inside SharePoint, you'll see a tab that says Site Contents. Inside the Site Contents page, you are looking at all of the pages that exist as part of this SharePoint site. We're going to click the New button, and we are going to select List. Now, you will see a whole bunch of out-of-the-box templates that exist for lists already, assuming it actually loads. But we're going to create a blank list. But let's take a look at this. We've got an issue tracker. Well, that's exactly what we're looking for, an issue tracker. We could certainly use that as a standard template. We have one for keeping track of assets and their devices right out of the box. So this isn't too bad, right? We could add both of those. I could have a list of assets and then issues that associate to those assets. Why not? Let's make it so. So here we just got asset tags and the status, manufacturer. That's great. So we're just going to say these are the assets that we have. Awesome. We're going to use the template. Why not? I would normally build this from scratch, but why not? Now we're going to add, we don't want to add an asset. Let's go back to Site Contents, and we're going to add an issue tracker. Now the issue tracker is just some basic stuff. That's not too bad. We got a priority, we get a status. Wonderful. We're going to add that too. So what's missing? Well, what's missing here is a link between the issue and an asset. So let's make that happen. So right now we've got a blank list, but we're going to add, let's say after status, we've got options to add different types of fields. So we've got an option to add text that just allows you a single line of text. A choice field allows you to select from a list of choices that are embedded in the field, meaning they're not pointing to someplace else and getting a list from somewhere else. Date and time, multiple lines of text, or a memo field, a person. This is directly in your organization. A number, a yes, no, a hyperlink, currency, location, image, metadata. Oh, a lookup. That's what we want, a lookup. So we're going to select the lookup field, and we're going to call it asset. And it's going to say, well, where am I looking that up? And we're going to look it up in the asset management list. And I don't remember what we had there. I'm guessing the title is what we want. Now, I can automatically bring in additional information if that's what I want. But I think for now, let's say we had asset number. We'll bring in ID. This way we can see the asset's ID. We can also allow multiple selections, but we're not going to do that right now. And we're going to hit save. So if we looked at that asset manager list, we don't have anything in here yet. So let's add some assets. You can take a picture of the asset. We can add an asset tag. That's great. We can give an asset a status. It's available. We can give it a manufacturer and a model number. We can even say what type of asset it is. That's nice. We can say what color it is. I don't know why that's important, but you never know. Conditions. Okay, let's just hit save. So now we've got some asset that sits in here. That's funny because they told me to select title. I wonder if they altered it. Now, if you'll realize, we looked at a couple of different drop-down lists that might not necessarily be most appropriate for us. One of them was asset type. So if we go to column settings and hit edit, you'll notice that the asset types are a choice. So we can eliminate or add to these choices. Right now we've got something called a printer, but let's add, I don't know, a conveyor. And I hit save. And now if I want to add a new asset a second time, you'll see, that's nice. How did conveyor not show up? Did I not hit save? Asset type. Column settings. Edit. Wow, it's right there. I guess it took a minute to update. Let's see if it's there now. In use, manufacturer, fake model number, conveyor. Yay, it just took a second to update somehow. All right, so now I hit save. So I've got a list of 2 assets that exist, and we have modified a choice column to accept a conveyor. All right, we've got to move along. All right, let's go back to our issue tracker. So now we've got this asset. Let's create an issue. Give it a priority. Yeah. And now we've got, you'll see the 2 assets that we have created are now part of the selection process for this entity. So I can hit save, and I now have an issue with a specific asset that is a hyperlink, so I can link to it whenever I want, and it'll open up the assets record. That's pretty nice stuff. That's not too shabby. Now, what if I want to know the type of defect? Let's say I want to know the difference between a minor stop and a speed loss or a process failure. And I want to make, because you use different tools to go after them, right? If I have a process failure, I need some standards in place. If I'm having minor stops, It's either center lining issues or it's issues with incoming raw material inspections that don't exist. There's different tools to go after different types of defects. So let's say we want to make sure that we can identify the different types of losses that exist. So again, we will go back to our site contents and we'll create a list. And in this case, we're going to use a blank list and we're going to call them, we'll just say defect type. So we're going to hit create. So now I've got a list called defect type. I can add whatever I want to it. For now, we'll just keep a title on there. We can also create these in a grid view, more like Excel, so that we don't have to keep hitting the new button and filling out a form. So we're going to say speed loss, minor stop my fat fingers, process failure, let's say in process defect. And that's enough for now. We're just going to put a few of them in so we can do a demonstration. So now I've got this type of loss. I exit grid view. It saves them all there. I'm going to go back to my issue tracker. I'm going to add another column so I can see what type of loss it is. So again, we're going to come down. Now, we could do this by choice if you have just a limited number. If it's going to be a long number, then you want to create it as its separate item. But in our case, we're going to do this as a lookup. And we are going to name this defect type. We are going to look up in defect types, the title, hit save. So now if I edit this issue, I click on it, I'll see the ability to edit this. As soon as it updates that column. Come on, you can update. Let's do a refresh. Now I have the ability to add the defect type based on the selections that we made. And so I have an in-process defect. This is some really basic, quick way for us to be able to manage this. Now let's kind of show you what a more finished or refined product looks like so that you can see everything that kind of goes into making this final. You've seen some very basic functionality inside SharePoint up till this point, but we're going to show you what we can do with very specific things. This is a finished defect elimination page that we built for a client a couple years ago. Actually, it's like 2020, so it's been a few years. So I don't think this particular one's not in use anymore. They have one that's plant wide. This particular one was built for one specific line. So what we'll see is this is the home page for this particular improvement process. And what you'll notice is this is actually a phone app. So over here on the right, from anywhere using your phone, you can open up this list. If I can find my power apps. Come on, baby. So you'll see the very same list that you see on the screen in the video. Why is that important? Unlike a Teams app that is essentially squeezing the browser down and things are not quite clean, when you build an app using Power Apps, it is designed for the screen. And so if I want to look at this particular entity from the phone, I'm clicking this button, I'm getting all the details. If I want to edit it, I can edit it. And if I hit the new button, I can add a new problem. So right from my phone, right from my device, standing at the line, I can essentially say I have, in this case, we've created 2 lists for a lost category and a lost type. And what happens is if I select a TEEP loss, I will only get the losses associated with that. So I can come down here and add a speed loss. I can define a business impact and a complexity, give it a status. I can assign it to somebody if that's what I want to do. I can also relate it to any other issue that's ever been identified. This way I can see if it's very repetitive. So if I have the same problem, the same speed loss issue then that we saw earlier, then I can literally select that particular entity. So I can say it's related to the 15 bag a minute speed loss. Add comments. I can take a picture, attach the picture via the phone, and say I'm good to go. And it will add that entity to my list. Other things that sit on top of this homepage are some analytics that just go through every time an entity is added to a list, it's dumping it in Excel. And then so I can see all those entities here. So I can see who they're assigned to, who's getting things done, who's not getting things done, etc. Now, how do we manage all the issues that we are uploading? This is where everything gets managed. So what happens here is we have 2 different lists. I have a list of the issues that are being uploaded by people from their phone, and then a list of tasks that are related to those issues, just like we built in the other SharePoint. But what we've done is we've put them on the same page. And we could do that in the same SharePoint that we were just working in, but we're going to run out of time if I do that. So we're going to make this a little quicker. On this particular page, we have a list that is by priority of all the issues. So I can see all the issues that are a top priority, a 1A. If you remember, we had a business impact and a complexity score. We're just combining those. So we have a 1A, a 1B, et cetera, et cetera. And that helps us create a list of what we need to work on. The advantage of putting the 2 of them on the same page is that if I select the 15 bag a minute speed loss, down below, I can see all of the tasks associated with making that issue go away. It filters the bottom list by the top list's selection. And this is really simple functionality to build. If we go to the SharePoint page that we were just working on and go to the home page, I can do the exact same thing right here. So let's edit. Let's make this easy and get rid of some stuff. Delete. Delete. We're going to add a list. The first list we're going to add is the issue tracker. Below it, we're going to add another list. The next list we're going to add. We didn't do the task yet, did we? Okay. Let's do filter by assets then, because we didn't create the task list yet. Let's move this above. And now in this list, I can go to edit it, and I can actually create a filter. So see this dynamic filtering? What do I want to filter it by? Well, in this case, I'm going to be filtering it by the asset. Which column? I think it was asset tag, right? Hit apply. Republish. So now if I select the top asset, you'll see there's nothing there. But if I select the second one, you'll see the issue that's associated with that asset. So I can easily say, well, show me all the issues with this asset. Show me all the issues with that asset. So we did that in about 3 seconds. It's not terribly complicated to do that. I would encourage you to get as much training in SharePoint as you possibly can. I am not a developer. I am not a SharePoint expert by any means. I am probably 99% self-taught, and can build the apps in Power Apps. It's not terribly complicated, and maybe we'll have some future webinars on how to actually build a Power App, a basic Power App, that would help us. Again, if we go back to the Defect homepage, this is a Power App built, I don't know, in a couple hours. It's not terribly complicated. And now suddenly everybody has the ability from their phone to hit the plus sign, snap a picture, add a defect, have it come to a SharePoint site, give you the ability to prioritize what the item is. So somewhere in here, did we give it a priority? I think we gave it a 1C, right? The new one that I put in there. Yep, here it is right here. So here's the defect that we registered from the phone. We said it was related to the 15 bag a minute speed loss. And right now it doesn't have any tasks, but I can start adding them. And so we can immediately start adding the tasks. I can change the status if I want to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Hit save. And now I can go back there and I can see that I have a single task. Well, I never saved it. I don't think I added all the fields, but you would end up with a list of all the tasks. And again, all of that automatically feeds into the charts. It's pretty straightforward. And quite honestly, I think in about 2 hours start to finish, we could probably build this exact page. Most of the functionality, or at least capability outside of the Power App, we pretty much built. We may not have been specific to each of the columns and gone through a long thought process about what should be in them. But the basic functionality of being able to do this, you just saw in 45 minutes, considering I mangled the first 15 minutes. So I'm sure there are questions. I'm sure I went way too fast for someone who may not have any SharePoint experience. But I would suggest that you create, go into your teams, create a dummy team site, just like a test, a playground, a sandbox, and play around with the functionality and see what you can do with Teams. I would also encourage, and SharePoint, and I would also encourage you to join the webinar that'll be in the future on how to create a document management library in Teams. If you struggle because projects dump stuff in folders on some S drive or whatever you may call it locally, join that webinar, because that webinar is gonna go through all of those scenarios. I'm going to go to the Q&A now and see if we have anything additional. Is there an option to integrate these SharePoint features with the CMS like Maximo or SAP? What I intend to do is SharePoint shall receive selected data from a CMS. Yes, of course you can. So in Power Apps, let's go back. So let's say we're in Power Apps and I want to create a new app. I can create new all kinds of stuff. I can create flows, and a flow allows me to take data from a data source and put it into SharePoint. I don't know how long that's going to take. Sometimes this is a little bit clunky, but all right. So you'll see right now we've got responses. Oh yeah, I might want to give you a link. I didn't do that. We have a QR code associated with our webinars. And at the end of the webinar, typically you have the ability to go to a survey and fill out the survey. We have a specific flow that takes that survey response and puts it into a SharePoint list. So if I go to our SharePoint sites and I go to webinars, you'll see this one called course evaluations. This list is dumped here through a flow from an online survey. It's not record, they're not in SharePoint recording it. So you can create a new flow. I don't know what kind of templates we have, but you essentially would have to create a data source, and your IT people would be able to create the data source for Maximo, right? It's basically going to be your server name. And then the server name is going to ask you to do a login here, and that creates the data source. Once you've created the data source, then you can have the data come into SharePoint. So let's say I want to create an app. Let's go back to Power Apps. And I want to create a new app. Create app. Start with data. Start with blank table. No, I don't want to do that. I want to connect it. New app. Start with page design. Okay. It doesn't matter. Just give me a blank canvas. Over on the left-hand side here, you're going to see a list of data sources that you can choose from. Over here where you see this cylinder, this is where you would get data from. And so you can create a connector. And these can be as simple as like an SQL or ODBC connection. So if you have access to the Maximo, say, report server, let's see. So it can be MySQL, Azure, SQL Server. Let's see, ODBC. All right, so you can't do an ODBC anymore, but that just shows my age. But you can do a MySQL, which means as long as you have the Maximo server name and you have your login credentials, you can create a data source and pull any tables you want into Power Apps and Power BI. It won't let you write to that information, but it will let you pull it. Hope that helped. Any other questions? Awesome. We're 1 minute over. I really apologize for how fast this had to go and the technical issue up front. I think this is pretty good. I would love to hear some feedback on should we do something that's a little bit more formal in terms of like a training course, or a series of webinars on a topic like this, because it is kind of technical and might need to move slower. But I would love to see that, to see if we can make that happen. Shoot us an email at ask@reliabilityx.com, or shoot me an email at george.williams@reliabilityx.com. Let me know your thoughts with respect to doing a webinar that's a little bit more technical, maybe a little slower, but spread it out over a couple of webinars. I'd be happy to do that. I think it's a great way for us to connect to that data that is sometimes very difficult to get, and to create applications without asking for a bunch of funding. You don't have to always, require a bunch of funding in order to make progress. And we want to add a lot of value, and hopefully you saw some value in today. Until next time, go make tomorrow better than today.